All right, welcome to our critique. See how you guys did with the development of the perspective, features, and building up those skulls into the next steps. I thought there was a lot of really great submissions, so congratulations. Seems like you're doing pretty well. I did go through all of them just to try to get a sense of what people are struggling with, what some basic questions are, and then pulled some work out from that. So this one looks kind of nice for the sense of going more to that egg for the cranial mass instead of the ball. There's a lot of questions this week about kind of the size of this and where the temple is and what the width of the head is. Here's my explanation for not using it as often or as a reliable measurement. The proportions that I gave you move with the face regardless of position, right? So the proportions that we focused on always work, for me at least. The proportions many people kind of wanted or were questioned this week was, well, what's the exact width of the head? How do I get from temple to temple? And, you could look at different ways of people set this up. The most common that I see is like 5 eyes across. I think that might be Andrew Loomis, right? Where there's like one eye in between the eyes. So that'd be like the area of the brow, then the eye here, and then a distance to the temple. So it's fantastic. Great. It works really well here. Does that work when we turn it? And I would say no, right? Because now where's this point, which I'm calling in this approach the temple, right? Which you have to sight, you have to work for a little bit. Maybe it's the end of the brow, right? Where that brow hooks, it kind of leads you there. Or you have to find a few other ways to kind of measure your way to that point. But I can't do 5 eyes here anymore. It's not bad as a standard. Now it's definitely not going to be 2.5 there, 2 over here, 2.5 here, would I guess bring me somewhere close, maybe not. So I'm using this as a flexible or mobile point. And depending on where you place the temple, right? So it's sighted, and it's favoring less exacting scientific based illustration principles of skull measurement and proportion. And it heavily favors the practical side, like what works for me to make a drawing. That's not for everybody. I understand that sometimes it's hard to kind of give to the practical when we want to really be kind of also accurate and know the thing that we're drawing and have a lot of fidelity to that. But it's just that's the tightrope walk for me. It's the balancing act. So if I want that to go even further, right? So the temple then becomes this positioning element that shows me side versus front. So I want to have it not fixed. That's just me. I want in my approach to have that with the potential for movement. That way I can pose my head, right? The position of the drawing is more important ultimately as a matter of hierarchy than where the temple is, right? So this would be front, and you can see how each time that 5 eyes wide would maybe get a little bit less viable each time. So I'm sighting it again. Now I'm seeing more of that head exposed. And if we go all the way to profile, so I think people here had the same kind of concern, which I'm not trying to in any way knock. I think it's good. I'm just sharing my side of things and why it wasn't kind of as included in the lecture, right? And now people on the side are, kind of questioning or thinking about where the ear would be and how do I get to the back of the head? The back of the head kind of does the same thing for me here. But now you can see the temple in this side view would be all the way there. To find my way to that temple, if you wanted, you could do like another ear and then maybe another ear back to the side or the back of the head here. So we could say that maybe the head from that side view could be close to 3 ears across. But again, that only really helps me from that side view. Not a bad thing to know or kind of use and play with. But here the main point is I like a looser relationship to the exact positioning of that temple because it's part of how I'm rotating the head in space. And so in this one, I think all of that is pretty good, right? So I could see in the big setup, the measuring, playing around with the different shape for that cranial mass and its buildup. I think the way that you're starting to find your way into the temple is pretty good. And so all that looks nice. And then we have our halves. This is where I think as soon as we get to the features that the head drawing, again, it's not about drawing skulls and noses and eyes and mouths. It's about form intersections for me. How do I modify a form? How do I cut into a ball to reveal sockets? How do I add to a ball to create a continuity of form into the nose? So here, if we were to add some of these, I'd find temple looks to be about here. So I'm sighting. How would I sight? I could look for where that brow ends. I could stay cautious and aware of where plane and shadow ends, even though I'm not starting to render. Value is always just equal to surface change. So if you're seeing any type of value gradation, what you're really seeing is some kind of surface turn. And so I'll use stuff like that as clues in this approach to get that. And then that gives me temple, hairline, back of the skull, base of the nose. And so now I've separated the temporal fossa. If it's not perfect, you can always add to it, subtract from it. It's okay for me to think of drawing as this kind of malleable or sculptural process that we build up. And that's a lot of, like, largely where this kind of thinking comes from. And then now I know where the ear goes. If it doesn't fill up the entire plane, that's also okay. And then however you like thinking about the cheek, there's a nice cheekbone design here too. And then maybe now I've zeroed in on a better place for that temple for me. But it's not too far off. It's also kind of right where that ellipse is going through or moving through. And now let's think about cutting this whole thing back. So that's the sockets. Get a little overlap on this side. That's nice. So we tie those two parts of the face together. I think it could be worth exploring just like the surface quality or type of your socket real quick. So like this is the brow, and your drawings, you might want to go through and just kind of think about how that comes back, or like what is the depth that you're creating? Is it a spiraled circle? Is it a plane that goes back and then forward? Something though, just to identify so that when you put in your next form, which would be the sphere, you're able to start setting up the planes around it. The only thing I think should change in this would be if I'm above the head, I'm going to see more than likely, I mean, sometimes poses can be on the line or it's hard to tell, but the tip of the nose should probably go below that proportion marker of the base. So I don't want to see under the nose and above the head, unless we're doing, like a cubist study, multiple perspectives. And then here would be that box. This can drop back, make that nice little rhythm into the mouth. This is nice because it incorporates and goes up into the face. Center line changes. Good. Yeah, so I think in all that, that nose stood out to me probably the most. I did use this kind of to help what I thought were maybe the more outstanding questions in terms of comments this week. And then I think the one next to is probably very similar. I would make the same decisions here, mostly for the nose. Everything else is looking pretty nice. Okay, next. All right, so let's look at the back of the head. So here's the same approach. Here's a tilt, trying to match my tilt to my jaw. This would be 3/4 from back. So I want to continue this up. So we just want to take a look at what some of these steps look like back here. So I think good. I can see what you're thinking in terms of the alignment of proportions. We just want to get a little more form out of those. So the only thing I think we are seeing above. So I'm going to go like that. Here's the front. Where's my temple? No measurement's going to help me here. Temple is really close to the front. So I'm sighting that. Hairline. Looks like that forehead plane breaks here. And sight that. And then this is the occipital bone. So I follow that ridge across right behind the ear or just shy of the ear. And that's where I would kind of think about the back of the skull or head existing. And that should line up between the brow and the chin. That's the same measurement as the nose. So mine was a little high to start. So I'm gonna drop that down. And then because this is a square or more boxy plane, I'm just gonna start that as a box back here. It's also wider than the front. So in our skull or more skull accurate drawings, this would taper towards the front. I found that back or that occipital just by kind of working my way around, finding points and then building that relationship across. Here's the side plane, establish that ear, occipital is just slightly behind, and then use maybe the hair shape to kind of help accentuate and understand that. But I need to move my jaw forward. So that was something I didn't do very well in that initial lay-in. So I'm going to push this forward. I'm going to think about like going to the other side. And then, yeah, your neck's pretty good. So that's right where our neck can plug into. So you could create a form intersection there or just kind of fuse that with a wrapping line. This is the spine. So I was thinking of a center line across that form. I use a triangle shape here for this transition of the canopy of the jaw to the neck. And then in terms of this profile, when I have a view like this and we're thinking of building our forms or features, I'm mostly pushing out or in past this line. So brow out, socket in to the halfway, cheek out, maybe a little, and that's probably too big for that, but I think there might be a slight or subtle overlap for the eye. Cheek out, a little shape built on there, a little rhythm for that cheek. And then behind that, denture sphere out, like you're building a little landscape almost. And then chin behind that. But I'd suggest subtle, right where I have that line that I used for the front of the face, out, back, out, behind. So just a little trick to kind of give some sense of space where there's not a lot. Yeah, and then that's just some tips on finding that back occipital. So most of this looks good. What I think is happening that could be improved is just some of the lines lose that sense of continuity with the plane. So if we say in summation that this is the perspective of the head, even though there's an expression, I would still strive to keep a connection to the underlying form of the front plane of the face. So I want all those features to still go around that and then up. So maybe just like how the nose goes up or at a different angle than the mouth or the top of the chin, make this area feel a little bit flatter. So this is I think something that happened to people and myself, and it's just regular. But here I would double check again the distance or proportion from head to jaw. Like that's making the face look a little longer. So I'd say this distance even is getting a little bit longer in the measurement. This is coming back to the same thing that I mentioned earlier, where we'd want to keep all of these lines going in the same direction, or else the face can just start to feel a little wobbly. This one I think needed more underplane. So we understand the view of this head a bit more. I think that would help. Right now it looks like the nose is too low for the proportion. Maybe extending that, giving us more of that underplane helps. So I think for the most part, pretty successful, but there are some areas where I think the proportion gets a little weaker. And then some areas where, we just have to keep as close as we can to managing the perspective as its own, right? The simple ideas of how we wrap and connect forms. So you're really not doing anything wrong with the steps. Like I see all the steps correctly. What happens in some is that the step itself loses that connection to the underlying plane or surface. This is why in my own figure drawing classes, I always teach head drawing prior to anatomy, not because there's no reason other than this technical aspect is really foregrounded in drawings, right? That the hardest thing about anatomy isn't learning muscles. People are almost always really good at it. They pick it up. Usually they know more than me, which isn't saying much, but with muscles, no one struggles with the name, what it is, what it looks like. It's how to draw it on top of the existing figure construction. It's managing those shapes on a perspective as their own perspective. So with head drawing, we get this really intense exposure to how to build, maintain, stack, modify forms without hopefully losing like the solidity of the full, in this case, that box. So I think that's a really important thing to look at, right? And that's really the only thing that I think is going on, which is a good place to be because it's really important, really common. And so just getting this, and the basic principle here is anytime a form touches a surface, right? So you're gonna have a dominant surface, which in this case is the head or the skull. Every subsequent form has to, in some way, speak to that by way of creating a wrap. So it has to join that surface or overlap. It has to speak in some sense to front back, a spatial relationship. So I think if you just put a little bit more attention there, not so much on, it doesn't have to be about the features or measuring the eye, but this, like how do we sell the whole idea of the head in perspective? It would really help with these drawings. I think these do a nice job of solving some of those things. There is some nice wraps here, or like I think all of these would be those form intersection lines. Like when I look at each one of these features, right, or their proportion marker, they all have that reference to the surface under before they become their own thing. So that's a nice use of the intersection here, or the form intersection. Good. So I think maybe trying to now work with this a little bit, like this side specifically, maybe we could see if you're going to use that nice disc here, maybe we could show a little bit of the side of that. So we get this more perspective like wedge of the forehead into that disc. Every denture sphere there. Good. I think this could just use some eyes dropped in. Maybe break up the overlap here a little bit. Otherwise, it's good. Could be that this one just gets a little bit too much under, but that's kind of splitting hairs since we've been working on really seeing that. This one gets a little bit off our form, so that just that subtle lift on the outside starts to show some, and then I think we could cheat and show a little bit underneath here too. I think this one lost our proportions a little bit, or it could just be the neck. Bring this neck out. Or this is a similar one that I think in a prior submission, we gave a little bit more underplaying. Wonder if giving a little bit more underplaying would help on this one too. So when I start to double check this and just extend the jaw, I feel like the ear is too high. Like, so that placement relative ear to brow, look how low it is on him. So this is, to get a better sense of how that head is raised and up. So it's that glasses idea. Here's that thinning of the skull from back to front. We should remember that the skull, right, is getting thick to the back and it's thin in front. And then I think maybe just squeezing the nose in. I think the perspective is probably right, but the width of the base of the nose feels like it could be a little bit thinner. And that might, this our eye. So corner of the eye, wing of the nose, center of the eye, corner of the mouth. So this would be where the lips are at. So I think the big thing on this one maybe is just keeping the view. Like the view felt correct in the head, the bulk of the head, but some of the supporting information felt like a different view, maybe more like front, straight on or something. So just dropping that ear, raising a little bit of the underplane, I think would help on that one. Okay, I think it'd be good to try maybe going through some of the steps and checking out, dealing with these kind of more extreme views. So if that's my brow, I'm gonna pull my face here. Jaw, I'm gonna push my jaw really up inside that sphere. I think you have a great shape. Maybe we're losing a little bit of the angle. So let's cut that. And then I'm gonna start to carve out maybe the bottom of this sphere. So that shape there, I'm actually thinking about maybe planing back this sphere a little bit, if you want to think about it that way. I don't know if it helps at all, but to think of this as not just an indication of where the chin might be, but you're cutting a piece of that ball off. And then one thing that I think could be helpful still is, as we review some of those early steps, is really try to push the stretch and pinch of a neck so that this doesn't border on being too symmetrical. That's what we'd have, this kind of more longer S curve here. And then I'm going to try to offset that with something that might feel a little bit more pinched or C curved here. So that goes back. And then we'd be onto the form of the throat. And so I'm going to cite that temple again, which I think you did well. So again, what did we talk about for the temple earlier? The placement that helps you rotate, You can find it by looking for where the brow ends or kind of approximating that in your sphere, or where there's the most significant light and shadow break, right? All of those things could help. I would actually, and that's what I prefer relative to 5 eyes wide for like an exact skull measurement. Nothing wrong with that. You could go for that if you want. I just prefer this. And then there's my cut. So I think ear is going to be in here. Comes across. I can move my jaw now. A little more confident there where that should be. And then I think the biggest thing here is really just that nose might get a little large. If I work my way across, let's do a cut in, socket, keystone, socket on this side. So that's good. I think here the form modification of the skull feels like you're removing this. I have a nice area for that socket to exist. Maybe it gets, if we think across, it feels a little high on the other side. So I'll just maybe double check that. And then nose, I see it just below the socket. So maybe like this. I think the bottom plane shape you have is nice. And this just barely kind of hits the bottom of that area of the socket. So my spear for that form. Probably could bring that in a little bit, soften this, especially for that face type. And then cheek. Nice disc down to the chin. And then let's put it over here and really push that overlap. So one of the things I notice here is that there's too much of a problem with the development of form, right? Like I think I could, with the exception of the nose getting a little big, most of the forms look really nice and read well, and you have that inside plane, the sockets. One thing I do notice though is that the tilt feels a little different. Like I get that, and then in the photograph it feels more back that way. So that might be something to think about. Just making sure that you manage the tilts throughout. Like I'm by no means, always perfect with it, but all of these, I'm trying to get that initial direction that my face tried to drop at, just to keep that consistent reminder for not starting to move the head a different direction. When I get lazy with it, or I pay less attention, I'll usually have one line like this for my face drop, and then progressively things start to do that. And that gradually throws it off, or it can kind of make the head feel a little warped for a reason that I can't always put my finger on, unless I somehow work my way back to that. It's a small thing, but that might help with the overall presentation. Just double checking the nose and then watching those tilts. Looks like you have all the steps pretty well. All the big perspective forms of the features that we discussed look nice. First, let's start with a profile, since we haven't done one of these yet. Profile, I almost always cheat in the sense that I never use a straight line for the perspective. I try to use some curve. Even if I don't see it, I'll push it in that direction or try to manufacture that. Just helps with getting some sense of perspective. I think your proportions are pretty good. Halves, thirds. We mentioned this a little bit earlier. It's like this narrow line. The idea of kind of building past the plane of the face for the profile. We'll just practice that again here. Double check it. This is my cutout. So right at the base of the nose is where I want that skull to end. So I'm going to create that. That's the occipital shelf. That's a really nice drawing for it there. And then forward to the ear. Let's say it's this shape. Here's my jaw. I put a slightly underneath the eye, so that means it'd be slightly underneath the chin. Go and draw through that. I think this will really help in our head, is getting this S, C for pinch, and then behind. So maybe in this, I'll show you under that neck going away. So this would be the area where it's attaching to the rib cage. And then again, like we mentioned earlier, I know it's not related, but when these views, it's not the subject of the class, but in these views, the anatomy here is really helpful. If we think about, the trapezius, not as a muscle, but as a volume, I can put a volume like a cylinder in front of the head, and that gives me this nice feeling of a foreshortened form behind it. And then same thing would be sternomax, so it kind of gets pinched or smushed in here. And then when we start to work our way out, you get cheek rhythm like you have, that's nice. So I think in this area, the one thing that would help is just pushing overlap. So maybe the eye inside of that triangle or behind it gives me one form, one behind that, and then maybe onto a keystone, and then behind or attached to that would be the nose. Nose comes out. I like how you worked this to show that underplane. That gives a nice sense of perspective there. And that does come in. Maybe we could move this over that form of the face more. This would bring us to the cheek. Maybe that cheek could read as somewhat in front of the nose. Right, so again, what I'm trying to set up is just whatever planes I could get to start to move and turn away. Eventually, you could do the same thing with the eyelids too, right? Like wrap those around, and then those just become another excuse and form to push overlaps in this little area. And then here we have the form of the face, the mouth, that could be behind that line. Then maybe even the lips could be behind that, or slightly inside if they come in. But the really important thing I try to get in this view, really from the standpoint just of the form or the perspective, would be that the face in this view is asymmetrical. So forehead out, socket back, cheek forward, nose back, lips out, lips back, lips out, lips back, chin forward, chin back. Right, so I don't want to get too much of this same line because it tends to lose or kind of flatten this nice back and forth design. And then second to that would just be seeing if you can get the eye moving over these small forms when you start to stack these on that profile. I think most other areas look good. Some of the features do slide a little bit though. So I think like maybe when you're starting to look up and down, double check your proportions. So this, I'm noticing this looks a little low. I think that's common for these. It's going up or if it's going down to let that shift a little too much. So that'll be another side view to try to implement what some of the things we just talked about on. And then something like this we talked about, right, where the back of the skull can be this plane. A lot of this reads nicely to me. You might want to square this off just to get that differential in size from front to back. But one thing that would help me even more is to push the neck more in line with the spine. So I think having the neck come forward at a diagonal instead of straight up is a better choice to keep some of that naturalism. So watch your nose again. This is the same thing as I noticed above. Just a little low. And then the other thing would be, if this is the front of the face, let's say we're doing our face, all of our setup steps, and then this is my drop. Right? These features all start to kind of go a different direction. So watch this, right? Relative to the drop of this could just be straight. So it's matching the features to the angle of that face underneath. And that's a form intersection concern. Like just making sure that whatever form I set up earliest, everything still belongs and moves to it. So if I'm saying that this is the front plane of the face, because that's kind of the direction I see in fur, then all of the features have to attach on that. If anything slides too far out, it might start to break or lose continuity with it. All right, pretty good. I think for the most part, these all feel nicely representative of the different views. Try this one since feel like we've done a lot of looking up. So that's my tilt. There's my jaw. Neck, I think, would be stretching in the back. And because the chin is dropped, pinching here, or more compressed. Here's where I think the center of the face is. Try to get that, remember, to match my tilt. So double check my verticals, hairline, proportions. It's working through my steps. Nose. Well, where's the temple? Can I measure 5 eyes? Not really. So I can see here relative to the ball, which I would say is this. I'm just sighting it. That looks like 3/4. How can I test it? It's where the brow ends, and I see light and shadow shifting at that point from what would be crest light and halftone in front to shadow in the side. So that helps me make that mark. This is the hairline again. This is the back of the skull, my best guess or approximation. This is the bottom of the skull based on where the bottom of the nose would be. Now let's feel out that form. So this is the top, this is the side. I think this is about where the jaw might come from, although I could change it. Just try playing with a more distinct line here. Even if you're not right at first, you can come back and fix it. Here it feels too loose, and so I'm losing some form there. I like to have the back of the jaw kind of have an echo of the side plane of the face to it, so that perspective. The sockets come back. Feels a little bit disconnected from that wrapping line here, so every time you drop like down to your brow, make sure you're coming back to that, so center along the wrapping line of the brow, just so everything holds on that surface. If there's too much like this, I start to lose that line. So that's just drawing mechanics. That's just really nothing to do with how much you know the head or you understand about the process. It's the form intersection principle. And then nose, so keystone. And then this is my base for the nose. That's the opening of the aperture. I see the tip of the nose here. So lower. This comes out. And then this comes forward. So I think here, this gets flat for me, right? Because we're losing that under over. So on this, I'm going to try to pull it up more. So let's get a little less in it for her too. So I want the tip of the nose or the box to be seen from above with that trajectory moving down. Here's the cheek behind, and then so ear. I think the height of the ear is good. It got a little far back though. You could probably push that forward some. Cheek and mouth. Let's start to overlap these. So maybe the mouth could be behind that cheek line. Here's the push of that denture sphere out. And then maybe just a more clear overlap of that chin. So we get all these forms to start relating those big decisions so that I can maybe soften them later. And then now, like I said, maybe this should shift forward more. I've got the basic idea, but if I just kind of pull that line up, maybe I start to get closer to a more feminine look or face. Here's kind of exploring off the side of that cheek. Or sometimes I'll just play around with surface contours to get a handle on what I think the forms of the face are doing and how they interact. So yeah, I think that would be the biggest thing that I'm noticing in some of these is just that the wrapping lines of the features sometimes don't connect as well to the face as we'd like them to. Other times I think they do really well, but that would be one thing to try to be cautious of for the coming week. Okay, so another set of nicely done heads here. For the most part, good. All the form building looks nice. It looks like you have I think if anything, it might just be kind of in some areas falling through with those form intersections. So let's take a look at this one here. I like the way that you're planing the forehead in this one a lot. It's really nice. So here's the back of the skull. Maybe this one we even start to shape it a little bit more like the egg. If that's something, maybe that's something you feel ready to do, where you could kind of graduate from the ball to thinking about the more specific forms and shapes. And then our chin would be here. So it's almost profile. I'll bring that up. Here's my perspective. Make you have a nice undershot for that. Here's the center. Here's where I think that neck would go. So that's where I'd imagine the proportion of the nose continue back here. And then we have this volume of the neck pushing forward. So I think in this area, it looks a little big to me. Maybe double check the keystone or that kind of is half up from the nose. And then thirds, there. And then back to this issue of the temple. You did a good job sighting it. So eyebrow or where light and shadow ends, did your hairline back. Again, that's where I could see you have even a nice specific angle for this person. Vertical, and then becomes the top. So that's where I'm looking for the hairline. Swing that back. And this gives us the height of our cutout. So maybe this could be a little higher. You could kind of end that around the area of the nose if you wanted, just to make it more specific. And then this is the width. So in this sense, maybe our cutout would be more of a broader ellipse. And clean up this. And my jaw from there is going to go, try to make these lines more equal to start. It just helps me to kind of keep the proportion moving down. You could change it later, but I'm trying to think of that about the same length up. And then this is an underplane. Do our ear back here. Nice big rhythm. And then for, maybe I need to move my line down here a bit. Oh man, I need to, that's nice. Move back. Here's the keystone. And that's gonna foreshorten over that center line. So I try to focus on showing more of it here, less on the other side. And then maybe open this up a little bit more, just a little bit more distance. Right up against there, you left a nice space for the temple. Down. So I think, yeah, this part just looks a little low is all, to me. And then I like, this is great too, kind of taking those thirds, bringing them up to show the planes across the forehead. That way. And then you could continue them up like you did here. So nose is definitely a cool shape, different shape. Seeing it past the face, maybe here or something. So that begins my underplane. And then we could maybe just build this off of a curve as a whole if you want to try to match that likeness more. Maybe it's like a S curve that pushes in at top. That's where I'm this is where I'm thinking the highlight would be, thereabouts. And then this line, maybe I'll match more to the curvature of the face as a wrap. Click way in this direction. Nice inside corner plane for that eye socket. Here's an eye. Underplane for the nose. Top of the chin. Well, a sphere, and I'm about to move the mouth up to kind of move with this proportion. So I would say maybe with the sphere for the mouth, just trying to, how could you match that to another existing construction line? Do you want to swing it in with the nose or kind of build a rhythm so these feel like they go together? Or sometimes I like to overlap that in front, or if we see any of the cheek, maybe a little overlap for that side. Just something so it feels like it's integrated. And then maybe start to think of that. You can even think of like how the mouth would turn direction. So it's really minor on this one. It's just kind of shifting some proportions around and maybe tying some forms together a bit more. But otherwise, I think it's really well done. This one, I think, is deceptive. It's a hard one because this one is, I think it's above the nose because I'm over the head. So I think the nose in this one would have to be slightly lower. But it's hard to make that decision because I also see the nostril. So I'm like, oh, I can't see over it because then I wouldn't see the bottom plane. But sometimes that can just be the flip of the curvature to the nostril. So I might do this for that nose. And then maybe that I could show like a little bit of this just as like the contour of that drop. So we're still seeing the top, but there's a bend to that allows me to see some of the flare of the nostril. And then, yeah, I think the mouth would be doing the same. So you have that, so that'll also be from above. And that's the only thing that stands out to me there a little bit. Good, the rest are nice. Just some small things here and there. Yeah, these ones are nicely put together. So maybe, so I think it's small things at this point. This is a good place to be because you have your basic head construction. The pieces seem to fit together. There doesn't seem to be proportion issues. Nice form intersections. Things are attaching. So I think this is a point where you can start to look at your head constructions and now say, well, I've gotten to this point. I'm mostly doing the steps, the 8 to 10 steps, regularly and consistently to the point where I could maybe invent. So now I would try to see if I can, how can we modify the head construction to start to maybe emulate qualities of who and what I see? So, maybe that would mean, well, maybe instead of the jaw, maybe I start to like tweak these lines. So I'm not doing likeness in total yet, where I'm going in and trying to nail, like her shapes. But what would it be like to try to make the construction feel more feminine to start? Maybe I thin the chin or move this corner in, right? So it's not too squared or overly squared. What's the height of her cheekbone? What is the kind of the turn or trajectory of her temple? Maybe does the forehead have to move in? I think it could be, or maybe I start to round off some corners, and that might bring out a little bit softer of a feeling to the face. That's the only point I could really start to see these developing toward that would make them work a little bit easier towards moving at a finish or in anticipation of a finish. If not, some of the other steps as we've developed them are going to do that for you. But if you can solve it earlier, it just makes your life easier down the road. So like bringing this in, trying to look at that angle, and then how do the forms as they overlap produce that angle back. Maybe instead of just a block, we look for a sweep, and then start to, in construction terms, define, what the planes of her nose might be, so that when we've developed the cartilage and the features around it, it just gets us there a little faster. This looks to be pretty good for her mouth. That's just adjusting my proportion so I can try to find that later. Here's about, let's shift that chin around for that mouth. Maybe it should be about this shape. So incremental, right? But I think going toward something like this, we can morph the weird construction into feeling a little bit more identified with our sitters, or like in this one, I think maybe we got a little wide across the front. And that could be a few things. It could be where you're placing the temple, could be starting with a ball that's a little big for the jaw, any number of things, right? Where you could go back and check your process. And I do see what you're going after there. She does have a very kind of broader jaw, but it kind of, for me, it reflects too much in the forehead. So maybe trying to bring this down and in could give that face shape a bit more of that feeling up here, and then it could get broader down. Or maybe we go instead with the same disc, but you push this line up, and that starts to feel more like a higher cheekbone as opposed to something that's lower and broad. I think I described this in the lectures, but I always think of it as like in the old school games where you're tasked early on with identifying, your character's likeness or making the character the face type you like. It's like moving these vertices up and down to get different face shapes. That's how I try to think of it. This stage, at least. I think this would be another good candidate where we kind of think, that forehead maybe leans back. There's nothing wrong with the proportion as you have it, but just dropping that back and then turning into this might match her a little bit more, something like that. Otherwise, they're coming together really nicely. They're solid. They have proportion. It's everything we want at this point. Looks like all the steps are there, so that's a good thing. So we just need, once steps are there, we just need to refine them. So there's a question mark on this one, so that's always a good place for me to start. So here's my head. Got pretty dramatic tilt. Jaw goes this way. Neck goes this way. Shoulders across. Where does that chin end? Definitely in line with the egg like you have. And then we're under, so and it's tilted back. So I'm gonna go, because I'm not sure about how to design it yet, I'm gonna go from the brow to the ear and get my perspective ring. So I think we'd be seeing something like this. So that's what I want to give to the underside of the jaw too. So I just try to echo that perspective and put it here. On yours, it kind of goes, this one goes this way, this one goes that way. So it's warping a little bit there, I think. So there's that underplane, so that becomes more consistent. You can think of it ending. And then I get that nice, definitely an S curve here. And try to see if you can get these to be asymmetrical. C versus S. So there's a little difference in the height. Here they kind of funnel too much, and I think it makes that neck feel a little static. This would tie behind the nose, so we get our nose That comes across this way. Let's wrap that in there. And then this area would be the thyroid cartilage, the windpipe for the structure of the neck, pit of the neck, clavicle, just to fill in some of the masses, traps. And then back up here, my proportions lightly indicated. Temple is here. You did a good job placing that. Nose, back of shape. That's where I think our side is. Split that. That's where the jaw is going to start. And then I'm going to bring this down to my initial little cutback. So this would be side of face. This would be under jaw. Ear could be in this little squat. Doesn't have to fit it perfectly, but it's just a helpful little measurement to see if I can meet up with. And then I come back up for the placement of the features. Keystone over, I don't know, profile, there's a lot of triangles for me. So I'm mostly kind of looking for triangle planes, like that eye socket, and seeing it like that, or I guess that line would go down, and then the ball of the eye would just kind of fit in there. Is a really cool nose shape. Triangle too, comes off. So here's that thing we were talking about earlier where wrapping lines, that study of just creating continuity between forms that are sculptural and kind of stacked up. Half of these I would want to be the same. Chin, nose, brow. So I double check. Chin, nose, brow. So brow and nose are aligned, chin is still off. So here's the bottom of that nose. Let's make this the same if we can. Then that would drop back. So it's underplaying. Even the eyelids I would see as triangular. So what I think that you're doing well that you could push even more is overlapping these forms. So maybe the mouth in a view like this would be overlapping in front of the nose, just like the socket overlaps in front of the eye. That's a little early, I know, but just showing in case. Chin in front of mouth, and then mouth underplane. Center of the eye would give me the corner of the mouth, so that just kind of helps me set up for later. I'm thinking where these would line up. So really close, and that's what I mean. Like you got all the right stuff. It's just a matter now of fine tuning it and kind of placing it in with a little bit more comfort. And that just comes by way of practice, like doing it enough where it all starts to sync up. But once you do a few, there's only so many positions the head's going to be in. So you're mostly going to get like, you know, the first pass through a pose is going to be a little awkward, uncomfortable, and then it'll just be like formula. So that would be a double check for that one. And then from here, what I'm seeing in a lot of the rest would be some of those same issues. Like mostly it's matching this to this, to this, to that. So they fan a little bit, but that's enough to kind of throw some of the proportion and perspective. And then, and so this matches the face. Maybe I know it's hard on this guy because we don't have a jaw, but getting that underplane for the beard or the chin, all the same. I'm going to just do my best to imagine the jaw. Here's the nose. So we might see a little bit under that minus the beard. So this would be that little plane of connection from the back of the jaw to the neck. So in this one, I think maybe working more on that to get this little transition. I could see what you're starting to do. That feels like a lot though, maybe. So it could just be minor, a little less. Other things to look out for might be like here, I think your features slid down a bit too much. This one could be an issue of double checking where the wrapping line is inside your head. So if I look at the whole of your egg, this ellipse isn't at the center, and that caused the features to slide down. So the way that I could correct or try to help from making that mistake is before I do any wrapping line in the ball, put a halfway marker and then develop the ring or the ellipse around that. And I draw through, right? So that if this is the line I'm going to use, that perspective, just like your perspective looks good. It's just placed more where I want it. And now when I drop the face and add the features, it's not going to be too much skull to too little jaw. So hopefully that makes sense. But I think it's really this is what helps me catch that. Because like I said, again, earlier, all the steps are right. It's just fine tuning how they get implemented now. But it could be annoying because, when we work onto these later steps, like there's no issues with those in your drawing. It's the early steps that cause them to feel off or a little bit distorted. Let's take a look at some of these. So again, nice. Looks like a lot of the steps are sinking in, are being used well. I don't know that we've done the front today, so let's try that. There's my basic egg. Here's my tilt. I like a lot of what's happening there. I think there just might be in some areas some proportion that gets a little bit squeezed or stretched. So we're going to try to focus on that. But I think for all of these, it's important to just keep showing the steps and doing the steps so that you can have if nothing else, just a nice grasp on that workflow, which I think if you practice will eventually give you some nice results. And then also, really, it's pretty friendly, user-friendly for anything that you might want to add. So maybe you'd like there to be more rigorous measurements. And I think you could still set up your drawing in a way that would allow that to take place with relative ease. You get your pose, your position, some of your planes, and then you could start to dig into kind of more hardcore measurements, inching your way across the face to find really specific relationships. Okay, so Charlie, the only thing I'm noticing early on is maybe this looks a little broad. So I'm wondering if that's at this stage or if it's something that happens a little bit later. And then I think a common thing is maybe also the ear to brow could be pushed in a lot of the drawings that we're working with for this crit. So here now it's to proportion, birds, temple. So again, how am I finding this? Look for that corner of the brow. That being said, the goal for this is to not do it, at least in the way that I see it. This is a training tool, but ideally we'd like to just be doing direct head drawings. The reason for this is that long term, I want to first find the planes, and then second, I want to artfully hide them. So the reason I keep mentioning the brow as a nice way to show the temple is that occasionally it either ends there or hooks there. And if I can hook the brow, if I get comfortable doing that, that shows perspective while hiding it, right? Because it's a wrapping line that goes across one plane, turns, and then references the other. So finding or placing that landmark near starts to help me find or think of ways that I could hide the perspective and then summarize everything that I'm doing here in one or two strokes. You could do the same with light shadow or some of these surface forms. But again, the goal is never that I just show people really tight head constructions. It's that I do this so that I don't have to do it. So this would be a little thinner. And bring that in. We're ultimately dealing with a form that's not a basketball, that would be narrow at the forehead and then broaden towards the back, which is wider. So again, here I'm thinking of this form seen from the front. So these could probably be a little thinner. And now I'm seeing that ear would sit down here maybe. Just a first guess, right? Because I'll definitely always kind of come back and tweak and play around with some of the positions. Which, if you're under the impression that this is like you have to do this step and nail it, that's not at all how I think about it. You could see how my line changes for the chin or for the jaw. And I sometimes will work light to dark to allow myself that opportunity to make changes or adjustments. And then I think the steps are really helpful for just getting your variants and learning something new. But then you can rearrange them and jump between them or collapse them. I thought this would be an example of collapsing them into one move. And sometimes I'll jump around between them and just kind of try to bring the face up. And if one area is more challenging than another, maybe I'll solve that and then jump to the area I'm struggling with. So there can be flexibility. So I think the keystone on this has got a little wide, and that might have made the brow or the area across the brow feel a little big. But otherwise, the decisions, the steps, it's like we were saying in some of the previous ones, I feel like for all the submissions, the steps are there. They're understood, right? It's not the hard part. Oh, it's hard, right? Don't get me wrong. I think it's challenging. But what people are struggling with this week tend to be some of the things we mentioned, like just getting comfortable putting the poses together that are awkward or uncomfortable still. Second to that might be primarily the wraps and the overlaps, or what I'm putting under the umbrella category of form intersections, right? So I think some of the nose and sockets start to feel like they slide a little bit, or this guy kind of wobbles in terms of these relating to each other, right? So that's a little bit off from there, this to this. That can make a difference in the whole, right? Where we want all the perspectives to stack on top consistently. And in here, in some areas, they feel like they compete a bit. So if I come back to this, I'm setting the nose up to have that. I'm trying to match to the best of my ability some of these angles. And then each line here, as it meets the more dominant form, which is the front plane of that face, has to exist on it. So that's part of the reason we're setting these up early. So let's say this is my front, because every other feature that's stacked to it has to go with that, has to relate to it in order to continue to build that effect, that illusion forward. Same thing for here. Everything goes across that plane. So that would be the wrapping surface, or up here. So it's kind of like making a 3D grid or mesh, and then just doing your best to make sure that anytime you begin a form, it stands on one of those axes. And that's not an understanding the process thing. That's just been getting comfortable with drawing, the language of drawing, let's say. So even here, like if the theme of the perspective is this, I would want the brows to do the same, the nose to end the same. You did well for the mouth, pretty good for the chin. Whereas some of the lines now go the opposite way. And that's going to make the read of form there a little bit more challenging. So at some point, drawing is just about drawing, and regardless of if it's a head or an arm or a muscle or something like that. So here's the dentrosphere. So let's think about, I like the way that you put it. It's placed really well, and it builds a nice rhythm in with the head. I like the way it kind of chains in with the cheek. Maybe I'll put a little overlap there so it feels like it's hooked in a bit. And then, I'm not really happy with my jaw, so I'm just going to move that in and see my lines progressively get darker as I get closer to decisions that I'm more comfortable with. I'm going to just leave the mouth unexpressed for now. So there's my chin, and then you start to think about some of the muscles here and how these would be the same. So a muscle for me is just a form intersection. I have the dominant form of the neck. The muscle passes through that or across it. So if this is the shape of that muscle, it has to push to allow an understanding of how one form adds to another. So that's this principle again, just the idea of drawing as something sculptural, which is hard to wrap your mind around for those of us that I think is most of us teaching ourselves to draw intuitively and just coming across copying as the best vehicle to do that, outlining. So that would be an example of that front just to this stage. And I think that would be something that, I would place at the center of a critique for all. The steps are really good, but now I think it would be beneficial to check the wraps. That these are better for it, the ones that I didn't review. This one gets a little long down here, so that's more of a proportion check. Right, but for the most part, they're working. I think this one is I want to focus on for just that reason. So I feel like this is a lot of the same thing that we're mentioning in terms of having the wraps. So let's just mention, since I think we've drawn a number of these views to this point. So if I'm thinking of this now as the front plane of the face, the only thing that I would fix in a draw up of it would be, I like how the brow goes across. What's not allowing some of the bottom portion of the face to sit as kind of keenly as we'd like is that the nose, as it starts to build down, that's nice because that references the big surface. But here the nose has kind of left the face. So it isn't anchored to that center line, but it just kind of slides forward. So if we just bring that back, then I'm going to wrap this line down, block that, and then this part can leave because this end point to the cartilage doesn't touch the dominant form is extension off of it. So any part that would need to touch it, or that does touch it, needs to have that wrapping integration. And so that would be it, really. The rest, I think, is coming along nicely. The overlaps, you just want to check that we ground these on the perspective. This one feels like, I think that the proportion could work, or the basic pose is, so this here connecting back is right. We could even work with this, right? So that'd be the brow, but the proportions just started to slide a bit. So halfway here, that's going to be where the base of the nose is, and then maybe the tip of the nose is up here from that. Halfway again, sockets could raise. So again, this isn't a step up to 8 issue. This would be kind of a drawing that just lost if I got a little bit of shifting around the proportion stage because of the difficult view. But I think if we just come back and shift some of that up, we could still have it make sense in the basic position or the overall position. And then from here to here, thirds, so mouth, chin, and then we could put our denture sphere in here, and then this would be the form of that mouth. So you can always, I feel, reliably use that halfway for any extreme position. What changes will be, this distance, or the amount under the eye socket I see, or when we include the features, the amount I'm under the lift. But I think there is the intuition or the desire to kind of, in proportion, do the opposite, like make things longer. I find myself doing that instead of showing more under. Could even try to like overlap those eyes in there a bit to make that feel like it's seen from beneath. Maybe we could tilt this under a bit more and see that. And the rest is fine. We should double check that ear height, brow to nose. Maybe I would double check this relative to your reference. Maybe that needs to be lower. And that'll give us an easier kind of upward view of something there. Double check this neck length. I stretch, just maybe a little long. This one, I think too, so it's following through again. So if I'm showing under here, I think that we're going to see under here. So that tilts the whole of the head back, jaw included. We get this plane, and then your proportions are from chin to brow. So you could do halves, thirds, and here. So that would put the base of the nose higher. So it could just be that you're looking to put that base of the nose too low, or you're just ending up putting it too low, and that's throwing some of the proportion for the lower part of the face off. Good. So I think this one's really nice down here. That one gets through the steps, and then also manages to have these nice anchoring of form intersections throughout. So that, right, these all line up in a way that describes the big idea of what we're dealing with, right? Because the difficulty, again, as we progress through the steps, is that the hardest part to me is just not losing the first 4 steps, those decisions. So that one does a good job. You could even push some of those more, like showing the underplane. I would say one thing I would change here is just the view. I'd be inclined on this one to maybe, gosh, it's right on the edge, huh? I wonder, my first intuition is to do this. It could be wrong, but I feel like maybe this eyebrow is lifted or something. I don't know, let's just play with it and see what happens. We can compare. Then maybe just a slight raise up. The only thing there really, though, again, is, because it could be whatever view you decide. This feels low, this feels too low, too long. So there's some proportion going on with that placement of the nose, which just feels like it's throwing off some of the bigger relationships between the generic features. So I would put that. But the encouraging thing is that I could see you're dealing with all the steps. The steps look like you understand them. And so now it's just refining, tweaking, getting some experience with it. Yeah, I think you're probably right, because here I'm tempted to put like the nose down and then drop it. But I think we do see more under the nose. But sometimes this is just how I figure out, sometimes I have to go through like a setup of pose to see if my first inclination is right. This is one that's right on the line for me. So I would really do anything but a straight line because I don't want to flatten the view. So I think the wrapping lines are good, like this connects. I think you could start to now modify, maybe cut your jaw in so it starts to reflect her shape or form a bit. For the most part, I think this one's good. What I think you could do here is this arc, I would bring here and start to kind of cut into the face and always tee that behind the brow. And then maybe you'll do like a little overlap back for the jaw there. So that starts to build in some depth. And then at this one, I think something happened where maybe the mouth just needed, right, that kind of drop back would be fine. I think what's useful is trying to get this shape in there so that we get the nose in front of that. And then I like overlapping the chin behind that. So it starts to build out a bit of a landscape look or effect. And so I get this, then over that, you just kind of leave the eye back into those spaces. And so it helps me a little bit, but I wonder, something is going on with the nose or it might be a little long. You just double check that, I guess. Yeah, overall good. I think it's just, that's thematically been some of the stuff that we've looked at today or worked on. The big takeaways today would be that everybody is dealing really well with the process. You know, if you feel like you're having success with this for the most part, like some of you in the critique, see if you can start to tweak some of the lines, mold the head construction to feel like the model if you can. And this will be an interesting and beginning type of way to deal with likeness. Nice job. Best of luck for next time.